Thank you. So this program is being recorded, so feel free to shut your cameras off if you prefer. We are thrilled to have Long Island Native Plant Initiative presenting tonight on native plants. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you all know of a couple of interesting initiatives that are going on related to this topic. One is called the Quag Wildlife Refuge started a Go Native for Wildlife initiative during COVID, and the link is in the chat box. And we reached out to many garden centers and asked them if they are selling native plants, and then we were posting them on our website so that folks can know where to purchase native plants. So that's a good resource. And also LINPI and Quag Wildlife Refuge and many other organizations have become a part of SAP, which is Suffolk Alliance of Pollinators, which is a new coalition formed just in February through Cornell Cooperative. And it's a coalition of local groups making Suffolk County a greener pollinator corridor through good gardening practices. And also I put that link in the chat box if you folks are interested in learning more about Suffolk Alliance of Pollinators. And lastly, I want to tell you a little bit about Long Island Native Plant Initiative, which is an all-volunteer cooperative effort of over 30 nonprofit organizations, governmental agencies, nursery professionals, and citizens with a mission to protect the genetic integrity and heritage of Long Island native plant populations and thus biodiversity from a landscape to genetic level by establishing commercial sources of genetically appropriate local, which is ecotypic, plant materials for use in nursery, landscaping, and habitat restoration activities. So Long Island is so lucky to have LINPI, Long Island Native Plant Initiative, here with us. And I'd like to introduce the president of LINPI, Greg Lowenthal, for this evening's presentation. And everyone is muted, but you have the option to unmute yourself for questions or put your questions in the chat. So thank you, Greg.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. We can have this presentation going on. Oh, here's our website, LINPI. And here's the Cornell Cooperative Alliance for Pollinators, the Suffolk Alliance for Pollinators webpage for Cornell Cooperative. Okay, great. So I'm going to go through a bit about native plants, and this will be a talk, so we can have questions. We can cover them through the chat, and if you unmute and you want to cover them as well, we'll pause at a few points for questions. And hi, I'm Greg Lowenthal. I'm president of Long Island Native Plant Initiative. I've been with LINPI for I guess 2.5 years now. Last year I was vice president. And this is my email on the bottom. So who is LINPI? We strive to preserve Long Island's biodiversity by cultivating what's known as ethically sourced ecotypic plant material. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But the idea is that we will collect that plant seeds out in the wild, and then we will grow that plant seed into plants to ensure commercial availability of native plants for nurseries, communities, and habitat restorations. And what we do is not only do we generate the supply, but we help drive demand through volunteer efforts, education, outreach programs like tonight. So what does preserving Long Island biodiversity mean, and how do we do that? So we go and ethically collect native seeds from our local wild lands with permits from state and local lands, towns and parks and things like that. We will propagate that native species from seed to small plants, and then we'll also actually help generate seed to strengthen their local genetics for certain species in a plot of land that we have at the Sisters of St. Joseph. We also provide these species through plant sales and grants for the community and for towns and programs. And we do education and promotion of awareness of native plant importance to the public. We also host LISMA. We just won the contract again from New York State for the next 5 years again for the Long Island Invasive Species Management Area. And so this is one of 8 PRISMs in New York. These are regions of New York State, and they are funded by the state to help with early detection of invasive species, preventing their spread, and protecting and removing those emerging invasive species, and partnering with local organizations to help remove those species in specific areas like our waterways and also our terrestrial areas. And so we actually now have 4 full-time employees through this program for LISMA. So what is a native plant anyway? So I took the liberty of finding a few definitions out there. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife says it's a species that has historically occurred and has not been a result of any introduction to a location. The Forestry Service says any indigenous or terrestrial or aquatic species that has evolved naturally. And the USDA says that it's a plant that has grown naturally in a region without direct or indirect human intervention. So in other words, it was here before all of we were. So you could say pre-colonial, pre-American. It wasn't brought over by somebody to plant. A lot of species that are exotic were brought over for many good reasons, like land erosion protection, or for pollination, things like that. But they then have since become invasive. So what is an invasive species? So it's non-native to the ecosystem. It will also likely cause economic or environmental harm. And then it causes it outcompetes our native plants, causing all of this destruction. So let me go back for a second. Yeah, so it's all about, we want to limit our plant species, especially from invasives. We don't want them in our properties. We don't, because what they do is they escape our properties. And it's not just next door or down the street. This species are seed can be thrown by the wind, and they can be moved by birds, seeds. So you've probably seen all kinds of things pop up in your lawn, right, that you never planted before, and these are because birds or insects have or the wind has brought that seed to you. And this happens in our native, in our local lands, in our public lands, in the forests and things like that. So you'll see a lot of invasive species in the forest. So what is, how do you know, right, what is native, invasive, or non-native and exotic? We have the LISMA website has the species for New York State with the tiering system for prohibited and invasive species. There's the invasive plant atlas as well. New York Flora Atlas is a great resource for New York State that tells us, all the different species and whether they are present, and if they're native, if they're not native and naturalized, which in other words usually would means invasive. The Native Plant Trust, Go Botany, is also a really great resource for knowing which plants are native and invasive and non-native. Also BONAP, the Biota of North America program, kind of a mouthful. And another good resource, if you Google any plant, oftentimes the wildflower.org site will show up as well, from Lady Bird Johnson. So there's also a very good resource for knowing about the plants that you're looking at. So, and we can go on off of mute, or we can go on the chat. Maybe there's some guessing of the native invasive species that commonly occur in our lawns and in some of our properties. Anyone want to take a guess about any of what these are?
I see a honeysuckle.
Yep, there's a honeysuckle. We actually have a few honeysuckle species that are native, like coral honeysuckle, which is pink, but you can tell the invasive one has this open trumpet, right? The native ones are not open like this. So this is an Asian variety, Chinese or otherwise.
Pear tree?
Yep, this is the calorie pears, which were in the 90s planted everywhere, including my neighborhood, as street trees. And now, we've been finding them in across the Northeast and the Midwest in natural land. So because of their propagation like that, they are considered invasive and they're being removed.
The burning bush.
Yep, burning bush. Yep.
Joan in the chat box commented on creeping Charlie.
Yeah, Creeping Charlie is definitely is not on in my matrix here, but definitely something that you know would be taking over small areas of your property.
Ivy is awful.
Yep. This is English ivy. Yep. And while actually the other ivy you don't want in your garden necessarily is poison ivy, which is not a true ivy, that is actually native. So it's actually a very important food source for birds, but that's why it spreads. And this bottom one, and you kind of give it away with the butterfly on here.
Butterfly bush.
Yeah, actually, yes. So many of you, if you don't know, butterfly bush is an invasive species because again, it's about that spread and that taking over of areas or out competition of native equivalents and of its shrub type. This
But
top one,
is
sorry,
there an
yeah.
Asclepius, that orange one, that's native?
So
Oh,
the butterfly weed is different than butterfly bush. So yes, butterfly weed is native. That is a type of milkweed, and it's a small plant. It's not a shrub like butterfly bush is. This top one you probably see now. It might be ending soon. This is lesser celandine. So you may be seeing these like fig leaf type of ground cover with these pretty, very yellow flowers. And this is very hard to remove and also takes over as a ground cover in certain areas. So why native plants? They're ecologically beneficial, both for pollination, food sources, and shelter. And they promote biodiversity, and we'll talk about host plants in a moment. They're more resilient than exotic species, so you don't have to worry about them as much if they're put in the right area. And they require fewer resources for amendments. You don't have to water them if they're in the right spot. You don't have to add soil amendments or fertilizer or anything like that because they will grow. And a lot of people call them weeds. And even in the common names, a lot of them are weeds like butterfly weed and Joe Pye weed and things like that. Because they will grow, and if you give them a chance, they will grow, especially if you put them in an area that they're well suited to. So a couple of notes about ecology. So pollination is not just for the native plants; it's also actually 75% of all the world's crops are depend at least in part on pollinators. And this includes not just bees, but wasps, flies, beetles, butterflies, moths, bats, and birds. And they're also, the native plants are the foundation of the food web. So you see a picture of the food web. So it's all about the biodiversity, not just the plants, but everything else. The insects, the birds, the mammals, the birds of prey. And they also provide important shelter for protecting and providing homes. This is why it's important not to do a spring cleaning, because all those bugs are, and leave the leaves, because all those bugs are resting and they're sleeping over winter, whether it's inside of the hollow stems of your bushes or the stalks of the grass, the dried grasses and the dried stems, or if it's inside underneath that protective layer of those leaves that have fallen in the fall. And you'll see a picture here that, this was a sample of blueberries without pollination, very anemic. So many things, and you do this even with vegetables and things like that. In order for a zucchini to become a zucchini, the male flower pollen has to get to the female flower pollen, and that happens by bees and other insects and things like that. And so I just wanted to mention briefly about biodiversity and host plants, right? So a host plant is a plant that a species will exclusively live on, eat, or lay eggs on. Okay. And so some examples are milkweeds, so the Asclepius species. So monarch butterflies, which are now endangered as of last year. So this is an example of a monarch butterfly on a butterfly weed, which is a milkweed variety that is native to the region. Sweet and pearly everlastings and ironweed are for lady butterflies, American ladies. And also even violets are a host species for fritillary butterflies. Here's an example of one of the caterpillars. And if you think about, there's this notion of keystone species, and these are species that are like super important when you start a new or naturalize an area. And one of the most important species to plant of all are oak trees, and there are small varieties as well that we have locally. But oaks are host plants for at least 452 species of butterflies and moths. So that's a lot. It's important to be an educated consumer when you're purchasing plants or getting them from friends and neighbors. You want to know our natives. You want to learn the botanical names. So, as we talk about butterfly bush versus butterfly weed, it's like, well, it's Asclepias, right? Tuberosa is the name, is the actual botanical name, the Latin name for the butterfly weed. And so it's important to know those, because as you look at the labels, common names can be deceiving. So something like Montauk daisies are not from Montauk. It's a common, that's their common name because that's where they were first like seen at the time, but they're not from there. They were actually from Asia. Okay, so you can see in the title, Nippon, which is Japan, the old style Japan. So this is actually an invasive species. So it's important to see, to understand what you're actually purchasing and what the plant botanical names are. And you want to look at not your growing zone like 7A. You want to look at your native range, because yes, things can grow in that same zone across the country and they will grow here, but they're not native. Yeah, even certain species of milkweeds and things that'll grow here, certain ones are not native. So they're not, they're from further south or something like that, further west. And for anything, you want to put the right plant in the right space. Just because it's a native doesn't mean it's going to survive. And I have the same problem. I want to put this in somewhere and it's not super happy with the soil conditions. Maybe it's too wet or too dry, it doesn't get enough sun. They're not made of steel. Some of them will grow, and have great success. And it's hard to kill them, but other ones are very specialist. And in general, you want to avoid cultivars. So all the pretty other colors of species that aren't the straight native color, because you'll notice all of your beautiful tulips and daffodils and all those hybrids that you get from online, like they're great, but do they get any bugs on them? They don't, because the insects don't know what they are. So they're not really benefiting the ecology. So, when you think about native, what does native mean? Is that North America? Is that the United States? Is that the Eastern Seaboard? Is that up in the Northeast, New England? What about New York State or the coastal plain, which is our ecoregion, or even just a local community in the Quag Wildlife Refuge of a specific species? When we think at LINPI about natives, it's not just about the species that there are populations here. It's about the actual populations that we collect from. So it's ecologically native. These populations, these ecotypic natives, grew here. They didn't grow somewhere else like Ohio or New Jersey, or upstate. They grew in this region, and so they're actually native to the ecoregion that you can see here, like 854. So actually our region extends up a little bit to Cape Cod because this is coastal area, right? So the genetic adaptations are actually specific for local factors like environmental and biological factors. So they're best adapted to live in our region, not just native species, but local populations that are indigenous. So they're better adapted for the climate. They're better adapted for stressors like the coasts and salty air or the fire tolerance of the meadows. They're most resistant to our local pests and disease. They're the best sources for the indigenous fauna because all of the insects and birds and everything can identify what that is and say, yep, that's for me. And they're best for competition, so against invasive species. And finally, they're also for symbiotic relationships, because usually, some species are intertwined, so they'll only grow next to other species, right? So it's important for that biodiversity that these natives are ecotypic. These are like the best type of natives. And when we think about designing for natives, as I mentioned before, you want the right plant in the right place. So that's your soil type, your sun tolerance, your moisture, your rainfall. As much as I want to have like a button bush in my yard, I don't really have a wet area that it's going to survive because it lives next to ponds. So if I want to dig a pond, I can do that, but it's going to dry out, right? And it's also, certain species are going to want certain things. So just like with anything else. And so while yes, in general, native plants are hardier, you just can't just throw them anywhere and they're going to grow. It's good to start small and you have groupings because that's how they occur in nature, right? Because when they seed, when they grow even under the ground by stolons or runners, that they create small communities. And so then it's easier also to then see that as a variety, because sometimes, the native plants aren't as showy as those hybrids that have been created in the cultivars over time. You want to create them en masse, like in drifts, to make a naturalistic look. You want to plant densely because nature abhors a vacuum. Because as you know, every time you have a bare spot, there's going to be a dandelion or something that shows up. So the more that you can layer in, smaller lower plants like ground covers that are native, and then you have some wildflowers, and then you have some bushes and then it all kind of fills into a spot. You want to fill in those niches because otherwise that leaves an opportunity for invasives to show up. And finally, don't be afraid to accent with other things, because we have a lot of great grasses that are native, and and even smaller trees, understory trees like a red bud or a dogwood or a serviceberry. And you may ask, well, where do I get designs from? So I put together a couple of resources here. So Rewild Long Island, which is we supply some of their native plants for their sales just now in spring. They have a few project examples on their website. The town of Hempstead has been really a force of nature, pun intended, I suppose, for native plants. They actually are providing grants back to the individual homeowners to purchase plants, native plants, and they have some examples on, so it's /NP, which is native plants, I believe. And then there's this other organization, which is more national, called Wild Ones. And so this is an example of a Wild One sample, free sample from, in this case, Boston, which is close to our region. So they have downloads of example native plantings and things like that. So before I get into more about LINPI, I want to take a pause, and if there are other folks who had questions about natives or design, or how to identify things or what they should be doing. Okay. So Long Island Native Plant Initiative, what we do is we grow varieties of ecotypic natives. So we go collect the seed out in the wild, and then we grow it, and then we propagate it. So on the grasses side, this is an example of some of the main grasses that actually we started as Long Island Native Grass Initiative. So grasses were the first species that we had started to collect and propagate out in the wild, like big blue stem, little blue stem, in Indian grass and purple top. And a lot of these you'll find out in our coastal areas, and also at places like the Hempstead Plains, which is the last remaining natural plains area on Long Island. We also have expanded into a lot of shrubs over the years. So the chokeberries and the button bushes and the hibiscus and the beach plum. So here's an example of what that button bush I mentioned before looks like, and when it has a fruiting body. And here we have our native hibiscus, so the swamp hibiscus, and the groundsel bush. A lot of these things you will see when you go and you walk near the beaches, or you walk near our waterways, or in our state and local parks and our preserves. We also have expanded into many forbs, or what's commonly known as wildflowers. So we can also open this up, say, what are some of these? Some of these may be familiar to you. If anyone wants to take a guess about any of these wildflowers that we grow, maybe you have some in your yard.
That's the Asclepias. That's how you say it?
Yeah, this one down here is actually the butterfly weed. The orange one is the Asclepias tuberosa, and this is the swamp milkweed. This was actually taken in front of my house last year. I have to,
Needs a lot of water?
so this actually, the swamp milkweed does needs more water than the common milkweed does. However, this area that I have is near my hellscape, and it does survive pretty well. And I literally I planted it, and then it flowered a few days later, and this was like one of the first monarchs I ever saw on my property. Like it just came, after like an hour or something. I was still out there planting other stuff, and it came. So if you plant it, they will come. And I never had a monarch on my property before I planted this. So it is somewhat drought tolerant. Like last year, I had to water a little bit more during that drought that we had towards August. But it will thrive better if you have wetter soil. Does anyone know what this red one is? This is a cardinal flower. So actually, this has been a very popular one as of late because it's very striking. Some other ones, this one's by the beach. So this is the seaside goldenrod. So we have several varieties of goldenrod that we grow. And goldenrod is a misconception around its allergic qualities. There's no allergen in goldenrod, so you can't be allergic to that. It's actually the ragweed that happens at the same time when it creates its pollen. But since ragweed is not as showy and we don't really see it, the goldenrods get blamed for the allergy. This one to the right is actually one of the reasons why I got into native plants in the first place. This is our native prickly pear cactus. So yes, we have a cactus that is native. You can see this on on the sandy areas just behind the dunes and in more of like that bushy area on the beaches. So near me, I live in East Northport, and there is a population in a sandy patch at Twin Ponds off of 25A Preserve. And there's a heck of a lot of this if you go to West Meadow Beach near Stony Brook. There are thousands of these species, and they actually bloom, and it's really beautiful. And they're edible, just like any other prickly pear is. It's a smaller variety than the ones you'd find out west, but it is native. We have down here the bone set, very important pollinator towards the end of the spring. I'm sorry, end of the summer into the fall. So you'll pollinator plants like this, all of those similar ones. They'll be like euthamias and the bone sets and the Joe Pye weeds. They'll be covered in bees during that time. Same is true for the top right. The asters, right? So this is a smooth blue aster, but we have New England aster and New York asters. There's a lot of asters in New York State that are native, and not the ones that you buy during Halloween, but these are perennials, and there'll be, again, you get a group of you have this in the early to mid to late fall even, and it'll be covered in pollinators. And finally, in the bottom here is Maryland golden aster, which is a native that occurs in our grassy areas, and it's really quite striking as well. And this was one of my favorites that we grow at the greenhouse. Let's see. Let's check the chats. So Helen, you asked about the changing climate. They're more prevalent. This is true, and I think that there's still open debate about what to do about all these things. But in general, our ecoregion extends pretty far south on the coast as well. So we're in between what happens in the Mid-Atlantic and also what happens in New England. We're at the upper edge of like the Mid-Atlantic native ranges, and we're at the lower edge of the New England ranges. So a lot of the plants that are already here natively, coming from that south central region, will be will already adapted to those slightly warmer climates because we are on the coast, so it is more moderated. But it is true that ranges will change, and with that, we need to address that and say, well, what happens? Is it do these near natives become native, right? And then what happens to the ones that then since become endangered because we're at the southern and tip of the climate? So I think the short answer is, there's discussion about that, but there hasn't been a consensus about that yet. What we want to focus on at LINPI and with the Suffolk Alliance for Pollinators and all at Rewild and all these organizations, Northport Native Garden Initiative, is to promote the awareness as opposed to choosing things like burning bush and Pachysandra and all these plants and the euonymus and boxwoods and things like that everyone has on their property, including my own property. But these are things from the 50s, and even before that were considered like, this is what you do. So, to promote the awareness of like, there are species that are indigenous that are as, if not more beautiful, and they promote that ecology around the insects and the wildlife and the songbirds and the bats and everything like that. So if you want to visit us, so our operations are at the Sisters of St. Joseph in Brentwood. And so they have a very large campus where they have multiple farms, because they used to have rolling grasslands that they would, have to mow, and that was for decades. And so they've really promoted for the past few decades a return to nature and, give back to the land. So, so one of those organizations that are hosted are us, LINPI. We have an outdoor greenhouse and a nursery, as well as hoop houses. This used to be a tennis court on the campus, and we also have our founder's plot, which is our acreage of farmland. Eileen has a question about American beauties and the celandine poppy. So I would say, yes, you should be wary of the labeling, but since it's a celandine poppy, although we said celandine before, lesser and greater celandines are invasive. You usually see lesser around here everywhere. The celandine poppy is not a celandine. I don't know. It's here you have it. It's a styloforum, right? Species. So this is actually this is a native, and I would say if you look up anything like this, then you would look at some of the websites that we looked at before, Bone App or the Plant Atlas, for example, and validate is that species native to New York. Most notably, like if there are these programs that send you milkweed seeds. Some of the you want to make sure which milkweeds you get. Right, we have a number of local milkweeds, native milkweeds, including 3 that we grow at LINPI: the common milkweed, which is larger and spreads aggressively, the swamp milkweed, which we saw before, which has that pinkish purplish hue, and the orange one. There's actually, I think, like 11 or 14 of them that are local to New York. But there's a very popular Mexican, or I forget the variety, down south, which is not appropriate for this area, and that is important for monarchs, but down there when they finish their journey, because they go from the north to the south on the East Coast, and they move up again. The populations move on the West Coast from south to north in the other half of the year. So it is important to check that and look at that. But the short answer is yes, that was a good purchase. I was actually considering getting some celandine poppy myself. So Barbara asks, what is the best ground cover to replace Pachysandra? Well, Pachysandra is definitely really, really easy to grow, and it will grow anywhere. And that's part of the reason why it'll spread anywhere, including in our local parks. And I live near Berkeley-Jackson Park in East Northport, Elwood area. And there's probably tens of thousands of Pachysandra in an area, because it just keeps spreading forever. No one's there to dig it all up. But I would say, depending on the soil and how much water it gets, there's a whole host of full shade native ground coverings. So Anthony Marinello, our secretary, actually also runs Drop Seed Natives out of West Hempstead. And so there are things like a golden groundsel is a good one. Some other things will be good for ground cover. It may take some time to do it, like wild ginger, which is not ginger. It's not in the ginger family. Again, you want to watch out for that common name. We don't have a lot of those dry or full shade natives at LINPI because we have to go find them, seed them, and propagate them. But you can find from reputable sources, whether it's Drop Seed Natives or KMS Native Plants, Kim Simon out in Lake Grove, or through the native garden initiatives, like they will, that some of them may be able to source some of this plant material. Also your local garden store, but as I mentioned, with anything, you want to look at that label, look at that genus and species, not just the name. And if it says like, ooh, native, I mean, this happened to me when I first got into natives. I bought a Baptisia, a wild, a yellow false indigo, and it's beautiful, but it was actually a cultivar because the size of the it's the same color as the native, but the size of the plant and the size of the flowers are much larger. And yes, it's still beneficial to pollinators, but like I don't want to go propagate that because it's not an ecotypic native. So Danielle asks about knowledgeable people or companies to hire to plant appropriate native plants and do assessments. So while LINPI does not do designs and assessments, and we can help provide plant material to those, we actually have a list. And if you reach out to to either my email, greg@linpi, or the info inbox, we can provide you with that list of folks who we have worked with or who have sourced plants from us for native designs, both individuals and organizations, and they are spread out across the island. So some of them, a lot of those organizations will do it for a charge, right? So that they're not going to be a volunteer or where they'll do it, but you would get the designer in. They would come out and look at your area and do some measurements, and then they would bring a design to you based on the conditions. But we can also provide some recommendations from LINPI in terms of what plants would be good in that area given your conditions, but we won't provide the design configuration. And so if you reach out to either me, myself, Greg, or info @LINPI, we will be able to send you that information. Thanks, Danielle. So we talked about the overall operation from our location, and something that we're doing. So we have I'll talk about the nursery and the greenhouse and stuff, but we can skip over for a moment and talk about our outreach and how we provide plants, because there's a question about sales. So we have open sales at LINPI in Brentwood on our volunteer days, which are right now Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. If you email info@LINPI, that will reach our joint inbox, and one of our wonderful nursery managers will be there to help you, or one of our board members like myself as well, to help select plants for you. You can purchase as few as one or as many as you can carry out, and we also provide for restoration projects and for school projects, and for wholesale for retailers like Kim Simon and Anthony and Rewild, through nonprofits. So whether it's one plant or hundreds plants, we can work with you on what, as long as we have the availability, we can sell that to you, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So our nursery is our largest area. You can see this is the concrete, what used to be the tennis court. This is where we have the plant and the plant sale. So when you come to the plant sale, you'll see rows of plants, and we will sell quarts and up So we'll sell 6-packs of grasses, we'll sell quarts and up of the wildflowers and the shrubs and the woodies. We have, if you want to come and walk down the dirt path, you can see our founders plot, which is where we have a subset of species. These are the ones that we collect en masse in different locations of Long Island. So for example, like that Maryland golden aster, the Chrysopsis that I mentioned before, we will collect from 7 different locations, the same species. So coming from different areas, both in Nassau and Suffolk County, because each of those populations have slightly different genetics. Even though they're the same species, there's still variations. And so we'll grow them in rows so that they cross-pollinate and create a stronger Long Island native genetic profile. Then we will collect that seed, the founder seed, and this is the eventual goal of the seed, is we will generate from pounds, then we want to hundreds of pounds, we want to get to thousands of pounds through seed production facilities eventually, and then have that available to all of the landscaping and distributors so that Long Island native milkweeds and Long Island native everything will come into your local nurseries. That's the ultimate goal. And so one of the more fun things to do, during starting soon, because we'll get some earlier species soon, but mostly happening in the fall, is wild seed collection. So we'll be, if you're signed up for our volunteer list, we'll be communicating out about when we will be doing these, and so certain folks can come out and come with one or more of the board to come and collect seed from specific areas. We only grow from seed. We do not clone or cut, because we want to preserve the ecotypic diversity of genetics. If you clone like a shrub, or you're taking cuttings, like that is the same genetics, so it doesn't strengthen the population. So we only grow from seed, so that is rare. Usually if you talk to a distributor or a nursery, they will clone or cut a lot of their material because it's easier. So you can't collect seed without a permit, and so please don't do that out in the local lands. But we do collect the permits, and so if you come with us, it's all legal. And here are some areas that we like to we frequent, but it's basically anywhere on Long Island that we're allowed to get to. If it's a private property, and you give us permission, and those populations were not planted by anybody, then and there's enough of them there. They have to be a minimum of like 50 individuals of the plants to collect seed from. Then we can collect of the species that we need from your property if you have that. But most of the time it's state parks, county parks, like the Hempstead Plains as well, all kinds of areas like that. And yeah, you can help us collect, and it's important that when we do collect that we do this ethically. We don't just like grab all the berries off the bush, right? There's actually rules. And so we want to make sure we're collecting, and it's not infringing upon that population's ability to actually propagate itself, because then we're hurting the natural population. We don't want to do that. We're going to, skim the top basically. So like common milkweed, collecting those seed pods, or collecting the beach plums on the shores near Sunken Meadow State Park, for example. So the next step for some of the species is we have to, and this would be true if you have seed as well from these species, is scarification. This is some extra steps need to happen to make the seed germinate. So some coats of seeds have to be scraped or otherwise digested because they have to simulate nature. So a prickly pear seed won't grow if you just plant it. It has to go, what normally happens in nature is an animal will eat it and then eat the fruit. Those red, they call them tuna in Spanish in Mexico. And there's these hard little black seeds or dark brown seeds. And if you just plant those, they're not going to grow. If you take our swamp roses and Carolina roses, just plant the seed, they won't grow. They have to be eaten. And then so they're digested, and then they get pooped out, right? So that's how that works. And so a lot of our species, some of them need to be scarified. So we do this either from chemicals, so like citric acid or sulfuric acid, to help eat away at that hard shell, or physical. So we'll scrape them, so we'll do that through a food processor with sand to help scarify that, or using sandpaper. Another thing that you need to do, and this is true for if you collect seed in your own garden that's native or perennial that's native to the Northeast, is pretty much all of our native plants need what's known as stratification. If you take a bunch of milkweed seeds from last season, keep them inside, like in a bag, and just like put them out, they're not going to grow. They need to experience winter. So outside it gets dark, it gets cold, it gets wet. And so that dark, cold, and wet will help it germinate in the spring. So then when it wakes up. So most, if not all, actually, I think pretty much all of our seeds, we need to do this to maximize that germination, because otherwise they won't grow. They're gonna be out of their cycle. So basically the way you do that is pretty easy. You put in a plastic bag, some sand, or I do also like paper towel at home. You don't want it wet, but you want it moist, or soil. You want to keep it moist, not dry and not soaking. And then you put the seeds in there. You kind of mix them around, and then you put them in the fridge. So stratification, depending on the species, will take 2 to 3 months, depending on the species or so. And this will be true, like let's say you have some milkweed, any milkweeds in your garden, and you want to collect that at the end of the season and in the fall or the early winter. You're going to want to stratify them in like January or February or March, depending on when you want to put them out. So rule of thumb for me, is I follow the LINPI schedule. So when our nursery manager and our volunteers are stratifying the seed, I do it at home with my own, the goldenrods and stuff that I have from LINPI and from other places. And then when they go and plant them, I will go and do the same thing at home. So it's a good rule of thumb, because we're keeping track of this to maximize germination. Then we finally propagate, which just happened actually a few weeks ago at the greenhouse. So in our hoop houses, we spread the seed and we sow them, and so they will be watered especially, and then they become seedlings. So then the seedlings are in these trays and we tease them out. So you come and volunteer, you can help us do this in a few weeks or a month, where they become big enough for us to tease out. Here's an example of the tiny prickly pear. They're very adorable. And the blue flag iris, very interesting, local iris. And then we uppot those seeds. So then once they go into the cells, they grow out of those cells, then they become 4 inches, which is where that's what you buy. The quart pots is what you would buy as you come to the plant sale. So our plant sale, we have open plant sales, as I mentioned, but our next plant sale, public plant sale, is open for business, without scheduling to come individually, is the 20th and the 21st of May. So that's the weekend after Mother's Day. So all of that plant material that you'll be purchasing is what we have overwintered that. So we had grown that last year and we didn't finish selling it, and it's still, and we overwintered it and protected it. So then the plant material that's growing now it's a 2-year-old, or it's in its 2nd year of growth. So the milkweeds and the species that we have, and I'll show you a list in a moment. For certain species, as I mentioned before, we have that founder's plot in that farmland. During the fall, we will plant more out there. So if you were volunteering with us during that time, we'll go out to the founder's plot like farmers, and we're going to dig some holes and burn some holes in our tarp, and plant new accessions or refill accessions of species that we didn't, that some lost over the year. Because we want to make sure there's equal opportunity for those groups, those individual seed groups of the different locations, to have equal opportunity for their genetic diversity to be participating in that genetics. So that's why it's important if you guys have come, we have all the labels on all of our pots, but it's not just the species, it's also the location. of where we got the seed, because we have to keep that straight for the ones that we bring to the founder's plot. It can't just be any old swamp milkweed. It's got to be a swamp milkweed from Montauk, for those 50 plants to refill that section. Other plants are less important. If we aren't doing those accessions in the founder's plot, then we're just going to plant them for sales for you. And at the end of the season, we will harvest. So you come and volunteer. You're going to help us cut down switchgrasses and harvest. This is a round-headed bush clover. So we won't take the individual seeds, although I like to do that, but it takes too long. So we're going to cut the heads off and cut the stalks. And it starts with the Baptisia, which is the false wild indigo, ends with the solidagos, the euthamias, which are the goldenrods, and the thoroughworts at the very end of the season, in like October, November timeframe, depending on how warm it keeps things are. And so we will then dry that over the winter. So we are all year operation. If you get sick of the winter and you want to get a little warmth, you can come to the hoop houses and the greenhouse. It is warmer in there with the sun. It gets pretty warm. You'll help us flip the grasses and stuff to help dry it out, and then help clean the seed. So we'll take the seed off of the stalks and start reducing that extra plant material. And then what we start with in the new year is to clean that seed. So take the heads, get the seed only, get rid of all the chaff. We rub that, we'll screen it. We have also, here's a notion of what the seeds look like once we clean them. So you have to pick the fluff off of the Asclepias, the milkweeds. We got to get all the chaff off of the Lespedeza. That's the bush clover. You have to, that some of them, they have little shells or things like that. You got to crack them open. And so we'll do that through various means. And which we already had done in March, is we also have a flipper machine, which is like a big old shaker with all kinds of different trays of different meshes that we put in. So this will filter out the seed from all of the other plant materials. So this is the final stage of seed cleaning. This is the most fun one for me. We only do it, for a couple of weeks in the year, but then it's really cool because you start with all of this clumping of all kinds of dried bits and leaves and stems, and then you end up, which looks like you walked into a spice rack at and like poppy seeds or something like that. So from the store. So it's really gratifying to see when you get all the seed cleaned, how much different it looks, from the before and after, because then this is what we store over the winter or seed bank. So there's actually a seed bank that we partner with in Staten Island, the Greenbelt Native Plant Center. And so they graciously let us store some of our seeds for long-term storage. And so we will once the seeds are cleaned, we'll label them, put them in specific envelopes, and store them for long term, maybe for the following year or years later, to repopulate our founder's plot or to try to create another set of accessions. So here we are, LINPI, Long Island Native Plant Initiative. I took the liberty of creating some QR codes for you. So this is our homepage. This is our volunteer sign-up form, which is a Google sheet, a Google form. If you want to sign up for, actually, this is the one on the website, so it'll direct you, so you can just sign up. This will get you onto the mailing list for our weekly volunteer listings and knowledge about when we're doing our our volunteer efforts, and our current plant list, which is, theirs are all on the website. We try to keep that as up to date as possible. These are the plants that are available for sale. So I'll leave that up for a few minutes here if you want to take some screenshots or use your phones on the QR code. I'm going to take another pause here. Are there any other questions? We got a few minutes left. Okay.
I have a question, Greg.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned that most plants, maybe all plants need cold stratification, and I don't know if the other word was scarification, but are there any plants that don't
Yes.
need seeds that don't need treatment that are local? that you-
Um, I don't know, but I guess probably I would probably say that some of those plants will probably grow without it, like a common milkweed may anyway, but you're going to get less propagation. So you can do if it's, for example, like I had all these seeds that I collected on my property, and it's a small property. I have like a fifth of an acre, right? So I had like 15 species that I collected from, and I put the seed in like a little Ziplocs, they're just snack bags, and I leave them in my fridge in the corner for
Mhm.
a month. It wasn't that hard. Also, a lot of folks are starting to do winter sowing. That will work as well, because it basically does the same thing.
Got it.
Yeah, but in general, I don't know of one that you wouldn't need to do that for.
Okay. And I love learning about
yeah.
groupings, because now I feel like I can buy more plants in good quantities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you start with, if you start with plugs, they're something more economical. It will take longer. It'll take a year or two for those things to start to fill in. And if you start from seed also, to become an actual flower, depending on the species, it may take us like a second year for it to fully mature, depending on where you put it and how fast it grows. So we have our overwintered stock plant sale coming up in May, but also we'll have our big one in probably September, and that's where we'll have a lot more of the variety of species. I'll just go actually quickly to the website. So here's our current plant list, and you'll see anything that is crossed out are things that we usually grow, but we don't have in stock right now. So, but likely we'll have the majority, if not all of these, available in the fall. So, for example, like swamp milkweed, we don't have any in stock right now, and what we have is still a seed. So, but common, we have some common, and we have some of the bush clover is really good, the cardinal flower, and prickly pear, the opuntia. So these are the ones. So it's only going to be probably like 20 something 30 species right now, but we've been growing upwards of like 60 different species or so through the year, and we try to increase, and we experiment and we research on how best to work with these seeds and how best to propagate them, and if we get and sometimes we need to tweak our methods, and so this is something that we do on an ongoing basis. And we have another.
Greg, are your plant sales pre-order or sort of first come, first serve?
We can do a pre-order as well if you want to, but they are normally first come, first serve for individuals. But if you want to order a whole bunch of them, we can set them aside for you. Absolutely.
There is a question in the chat
Yeah, we have a
box.
question. Yeah, what are recommended ways to eradicate? Well, that's very difficult to do. So particularly lesser celandine is really hard, because even if you dig it up, it has all these little nodules that are, if even one is left in the soil and they break off really easily, it'll just keep growing back. So a good way is if you are maybe, let's say you have a whole patch of it, you could utilize, you could solarize it with dark like plastic, and so if it's in the sun, it could get solarized underneath that plastic and die. You can also attempt to do this with, although it won't be the solarization with the plastic, but you can do like a lasagna layering of cardboard and wet it and put soil on top of it so it doesn't go anywhere, and that will smother it. That should help. If you have other things like wisteria that's causing problems, it's hard to also dig up that root forever. You may want to also use a targeted Roundup for that, and not necessarily spray it. But Anthony, our secretary from Dropseed, he recommends using like a bingo dauber and fill it, and using proper gloves, and you can like paint the leaves, because the problem with a lot of these species is even if you cut them down or dig them up, if there's something that's still there, like the regular ivy or a thing like that, there's still like a piece of root, it will grow from that. So you're going to need to really ideally do a chemical application and be careful with that stuff, and do it very targeted with like that dauber or something. It's like a paintbrush, because then that chemical will go down to the roots and kill it. But it may take a few seasons. Great. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for the questions and for participating and for listening to me talk about LINPI and the importance of natives. I appreciate the time that Quag Wildlife Refuge has given us. Thank you.
Greg,
Thank
thank you.
you.
This was a great presentation and it was fantastic. So thank you so much. It's really important information.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, see you out there. Thank you.
Bye.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you.